Oh, hello. You are just who I have been waiting for. You look like a classy gentleman, lady, or non-binary person who would like to enjoy an excellent 2021. Well, you've come to an excellent and classy place for such things. Hello everybody, I dressed up today and I'm looking my classiest to announce something I'm really excited about, and that is that 2021 for me and for you who watch this channel is going to be the year of the short classic. I am announcing a reading plan where each month in 2021 I am going to read a shorter classic that I have never read before, or it has been years and years and years since I read. I have found that buddy reads and booktube read-alongs and things like this have been a great way to challenge me to get reading done, and also a great place for discussion. And so especially with classics and deeper works of literature, those two things I think are key. A community like that to help read some excellent books, especially to push through some books that aren't especially, right up our alley. So in 2021, again, I've picked one classic book that I will be reading, and hopefully many of you out there will be reading with me. I will be doing read-along discussions in my Discord all month long as I read through the book itself, and then each month, towards the end of the month, I'm going to host a live show here on the channel with a special guest host, probably a booktuber, a fellow booktuber, who has some sort of expertise or knowledge or really enjoys the classic that we are talking about. I have the schedule ready, and I have the first two guest hosts already lined up, agreed, and ready. So without further ado, let's talk about those classics. First up, in January 2021, we will be reading the classics of fantasy classics, the great epic poem Beowulf. Composed toward the end of the first millennium, Beowulf is the narrative of the adventures of Beowulf, a Scandinavian hero who saves the Danes from the seemingly invincible monster Grendel, and later from Grendel's mother. The poem is about encountering the monstrous, defeating it, and then having to live on in the exhausted aftermath. It is one of the most important and most often translated works of Old English literature. We will not only be reading this fantastic classic, but as I said, we will be discussing it on my Discord. You can always join in the link below. And the live show, the guest host this January will be none other than the Professor Philip Chase, who is indeed a professor of literature and specializes in Beowulf. In fact, he even can speak and read Old English, which is what Beowulf was originally written in, at least the transcript that we have. So he will not only have a lot of insights into the actual reading of the text, but actually the history behind it and its importance in the realm of literature as a whole, and especially fantasy literature. So that is going to be a great discussion. Don't miss that. That's going to be at the end of January 2021, just next month. In also trying to read classics that have connections to the classic fantasy genre, of course, we cannot ignore Homer. So in February of 2021, we will be reading the Iliad. The Iliad, or as it is stated in ancient Greek, Ilias, is an ancient Greek epic poem traditionally attributed to Homer. Set during the Trojan War, the 10-year siege of the city of Troy by a coalition of Greek states, it tells of the battles and events during the weeks of a quarrel between King Agamemnon and the warrior Achilles. Dating to the 9th century BC, Homer's timeless poem is certainly a foundation of Western storytelling. As in January, we were blessed with a man who not only knows and loves this work, but actually teaches it actively, and that is going to be Alan over at the Library of Alexandria. He will be the guest host for our February discussion of the Iliad, and I have inside knowledge that he actually has performed a one-man show around the Iliad as well. So I don't think he will be doing that in our live show, but he obviously knows and loves this text quite a lot, and so I think that is going to be an excellent live show. In March of 2021, we are going to come in contact with our first female author, unless, of course, a female wrote Beowulf. We don't know who the Beowulf poet is. But assuming it was a male, given the time and place, March, as I said, will be our first female author. We are going to be reading Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. Northanger Abbey is a coming-of-age novel and a satire of Gothic novels written by Jane Austen. It was completed in 1803, the first of Austen's novels completed in full. I do not yet have any co-hosts for the live reading and discussion for this book. If you have ideas or suggestions on who you would like to see as the co-host for Northanger Abbey or any of the months as I go through all of 2021 coming up, let me know in the comments below. In April, we'll be reading our first American-born author, and that is going to be Alice Walker, as we dive deep into the challenging but important tale of The Color Purple. The Color Purple is a 1982 epistolary novel by American author Alice Walker, which won the 1983 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and the National Book Award for Fiction. Taking place mostly in rural Georgia, the story focuses on the life of African American women in the southern United States in the 1930s, addressing numerous issues including their exceedingly low position in American social culture. In May, we'll be sticking with the Black experience in America by reading an incredible important work of literature from the Harlem Renaissance period, and that is going to be Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. Their Eyes Were Watching God is a 1937 novel by American writer Zora Neale Hurston. It is considered a classic of the Harlem Renaissance, and is likely Hurston's best-known work. The novel explores main character Janie Crawford's, quote, ripening from a vibrant but voiceless teenage girl into a woman with her finger on the trigger of her own destiny, end quote. In June, we will be heading south, far south, all the way to South America, Colombian-born writer Gabriel Garcia Marquez, when we read Chronicle of a Death Foretold. Chronicle of a Death Foretold, or in Spanish, Crónica de una Muerta Anunciada, is a novella by Gabriel Garcia Marquez published in 1981. It tells, in the form of a pseudo-journalistic reconstruction, the story of the murder of Santiago Nazar by the Vicario twins. In July, we will be reading one of the few books on this list at the moment that I own, and that is going to be The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Leo Tolstoy. Now, you all probably know Tolstoy's name from his works like Anna Karenina and War and Peace, but this is a probably less known work popularly, even though it is scholastically known as one of the best short stories / novellas ever written. It's hailed as one of the best masterpieces on the subject of death and dying, so it is quite nice that we are going to be reading this hard and heavy work on death in July, in the middle of summer, the season where Earth is brimming with life. This will certainly equal that out. It's about a high judge in Russia who finds out that he is dying and starts to reflect on that experience. I personally actually have never read Tolstoy. I've read a ton of Dostoevsky, the other Russian great, but not Tolstoy, which is very interesting because politically I'm probably more on the spectrum of Tolstoy than Dostoevsky, but I just haven't read that yet, so I'm very excited to come in contact with this work and the ideas therein. This will also be a very interesting back-to-back with Ivan Ilyich, which is of course a very focused on death novel, and then as well, of course, coming off of Chronicle of a Death Foretold, which is also focusing not quite exactly on that theme, but sort of the broad themes of death and the human experience around that. So I think that'll be a very important discussion in June and July we'll be having around that. In August, we will be reading the only book on this list that has been written during my lifetime, and that is going to be The Giver by Lewis Lowry. The Giver is a 1993 American young adult dystopian novel by Lewis Lowry. It is set in a society which at first appears to be utopian, but is revealed to be dystopian as the story progresses. The Giver won the 1994 Newbery Medal and has sold more than 10 million copies worldwide. This is also the only book on this book list that I have read before. I did read this in middle school as part of my education. I remember actually liking it, and the final page I remember being actually very surprising for how young I was, very affecting, and I still remember it to this day. But a lot of the outline events that lead up to that I don't quite remember, and I think as an adult I will have a much more profound experience around the themes of this work. I am super excited for September's classic read because, to be honest, I have to declare my ignorance of this work before I put together this list, but as soon as I found out about it, I knew I had to put it on the list and was very excited to read it, and that is The Blazing World. The Blazing World is a 1666 work of prose fiction by the English writer Margaret Cavendish, the Duchess of Newcastle. Many have called it a forerunner of science fiction, but it can also be read as a utopian work. As its full title suggests, the description of a new world called the Blazing World, it is a fanciful depiction of a satirical utopian kingdom in another world, with different stars in the sky that can be reached via the North Pole. It is, quote, the only known work of utopian fiction by a woman in the 17th century, as well as an example of what we now call proto-science fiction, although it is also a romance, an adventure story, and even autobiography, end quote. I am so excited to get into this. Its influence is unquestionable, and yet I don't think it's talked about very much, or potentially I'm just missing all of this talk. So I am through the moon to check out this work in September of next year. In October, we will be reading another classic of the literature genre and another epic poem. We will be reading Dante's Inferno, which is the first section of the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. My Italian is not good. Hopefully that was right. I have this beautiful collector's edition from Barnes & Noble that I'm very excited to crack open. I love the epic poetry that I have read, although I have not read very much. In fact, if it's not Milton, I probably haven't read it. Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained are some of my favorite classics, but for some reason I have not read other epic classic poetry. So I'm very, very excited to get going and read Dante's Inferno. In November, we will be reading our first play of 2021, the year of short classics, and that is Candide, or if I was trying to be French, Chronicle by Voltaire. Candide is a French satire first published in 1759 by Voltaire, a philosopher of the Age of Enlightenment. It begins with a young man, Candide, who is living a sheltered life in an Edenic paradise and being indoctrinated with Leibnizian optimism by his mentor, Professor Pangloss. The work describes the abrupt cessation of this lifestyle, followed by Candide's slow and painful disillusionment as he witnesses and experiences great hardships in the world. And in December, to end the year of the short classic, we will read another play, and perhaps the most famous story of all time, or at the very least it has an argument to be that, and that is going to be Hamlet by the myth, the man, the legend himself, William Shakespeare. I have this beautiful, complete Oxford Shakespeare collection that I absolutely love. It smells like old knowledge and reads beautifully. I actually have read quite a lot of Shakespeare, Julius Caesar, Macbeth, The Midsummer Night's Dream, The Taming of the Shrew, a lot of those works, but I have not read his most famous, which is, of course, Hamlet. So I'm going to be reading it with you all at the end of December 2021. I'm so excited about starting this and getting involved in this and keeping each other accountable in reading these great works. Now, some of you might be somewhat intimidated by classics, and so to help you out, I wanted to give you some of the stats around this reading list and challenge, because it is not actually that difficult. First of all, the total number of pages we will be reading this year, and it all depends obviously on editions that you get and how wide the print is, etc., but it's something around 1,400 pages. which, to be honest, should be nothing for a fantasy reader. Just to put it in perspective, all of the works of classic literature we'll read in this entire calendar year of 2021 is about the size and word count, in fact, much less word count, than Brandon Sanderson's newest Stormlight Archive, Rhythm of War. True, they're going to be a little bit more challenging as far as the wording and themes, etc., but the length is not actually that intimidating. In fact, on average, the length of book we will be reading per month is 192 pages. Some are much shorter than that, under 100 pages. There's a couple on the list that put those page numbers higher. Things like The Color Purple are near 300 pages, but most are within sort of that 100 to 200 page mark. Again, the average is going to be 192 pages. That's also not taking into account things like Hamlet, Beowulf, Candide, that are plays and or poetry, so that pages are not filled up with words like they would be in a narrative. So this is doable. You can definitely do this, especially if you've never read many classics at all. In fact, I would especially challenge people who are watching this who haven't read classics or generally find that they didn't like them in school or didn't like when they picked up other books, like long books like Tale of Two Cities or War and Peace, these big, massive chunkers. This is a good way to kind of see why people like classics without really committing to these huge monsters of literature and still being very well read in the genre. I tried very purposefully to find classics from broad spectrums of life. Of course, I also took in some of my own knowledge and desire of where to go, so it's definitely not perfect as far as the representation, but depending on who wrote Beowulf, the gender differential is almost exactly 50-50 with 6 male authors, 5 female authors, and then of course 1 unknown with Beowulf. We are going across 3 different continents, books written in many different languages. I should have counted them, but I forgot. We have too strong representation of England, but I guess that's generally true in how we in North America study literature. You'll also be reading some of the most famous works of all time, again, like Hamlet or Dante's Inferno or the Iliad. And there also are in there some more deep picks like Chronicle of a Death Foretold, and The Blazing World, some other things along those lines. So they're going to get a good mix of a lot of different things. Of course, there's something that is a little bit more YA almost, like The Giver, and of course plays, poetry, prose. You're going to get a lot of different tastes in this. I think it's a good way to expand our horizons without, committing all of your reading life to it. So please join me on this journey. Again, you can join me by joining the Discord. I will always have written chats there, and of course in that live stream. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Also, one other thing to mention, if you really want to be part of the 2021 Year of the Short Classic, consider becoming a patron if you're able to financially of my channel. I only post my reading vlogs on my Patreon channel, so go over there and check that out if you haven't and you really want to see exactly sort of more boots on the ground version of what I think of these books and all the books that I read in 2021 and beyond. Thank you guys for watching. I look forward to this next year and reading with you. As always, first in, last out.